up, everybody? Welcome back to the Real and Moving Picture Podcast. My name is Ansi Tajay.
And I'm Shaka Bimba. I did the last name.
You always do the last name, but it's all good. We want to thank you guys for joining us today on this podcast. We thank you for your continued support. Before we go any further in our discussions today, we want to tell you, if you have not done so already, be sure to like, subscribe, all that jazz, leave a comment, follow our Instagrams, our Facebook page, and the Twitter accounts at The Real Film Pod. Like the Facebook page, subscribe to this YouTube channel. Give us some comments, give us some feedbacks. If you'd like to see something else in relation to the podcast, definitely shoot us a DM, shoot us a message, whatever. I don't know, leave a banner in the sky for us if you have to do that. We're always willing to take more requests. We're always willing to grow. So definitely getting feedback from you helps us to do that. We thank you, and let's dive into topics. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So today it's not going to be following, I guess, our typical category-wise. Would you say that today, Shaka?
Definitely not.
It's not really following our typical, subcategories and categories that our past episodes have. This episode, we felt like it was very imperative based off the times that we live in right now to actually be talking about works of art that are reflective to what's going on right now with the people. And so we'll be talking about a number of films today. Those films include documentaries for this podcast episode. That is Whose Streets, I Am Not Your Negro, and Let It Fall, LA Riots 1982 to 1992. But yeah, we're going to start with the one that's closest to home for us.
I just want to add too, we're definitely going to go back and do like something very similar to this, but with like more narrative works. Yeah. So like series and stuff like that. But we just wanted to really start with the documentary so we can start with like, a foundation of learning.
Yes. Yes.
I guess, I don't know.
No. You're right. Foundation of learning and growing and kind of being able to apply what this document, like facts to reality, more so than anything. So we're going to start with the number one documentary on the list, one that's kind of closest to home, which is Whose Streets. Whose Streets is a documentary that came out in 2017. The bio is an account of the Ferguson uprising as told by the people who lived it. The filmmakers look at how the killing of 18-year-old Michael Brown inspired a community to fight back and sparked a global movement. The director is Sabaya Foloyan. My apologies if I'm saying your name wrong, but that is the director. We also have some producers, which is also Sabaya, and then we have producers Damon Davis, Sabaya Jordan, Jennifer MacArthur, Flannery Miller, and it's co-directed also by Damon Davis. And Damon Davis, for those of you who don't know, he is also a St. Louis native, so this is something that was kind of close home to him. Sabaya is a filmmaker based out in Los Angeles, but wanted to kind of like track what was happening with the Ferguson uprising, and this film was actually selected in the 2017 Sundance Film Festival. So yeah, the documentary itself. So if those of you don't know, and around, I want to say the killing of Mike Brown took place on August 9th, 2014. And so Mike Brown was killed by the hands of a police officer, Darren Wilson, a Ferguson police officer. And after his death, it pretty much led to a whole movement, a human movement of, activism, awareness, uprising, protesting, and amongst other things, and also kind of birthed the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of people are not aware of that, but Ferguson, Missouri, Missouri, our home, is literally kind of like the birthplace of, I want to say, social activism in the sense of Black Lives Matter. And so Whose Streets takes on the responsibility of actually following those activists during that time, during the time of the protests and even after the protests. So
definitely. I think the biggest thing with Whose Streets is this is like an on the ground account of like what's going on. You know what I mean? So like you really get to like see the protests, like the times when it's a riot, like firsthand. And so what makes that really cool is obviously this is what you said, 2014, right? Yeah, because I remember it's like first.
That's when he passed away. Yes, that's when he was tragically killed.
That's when like all the footage was taken. A lot of the on the ground footage was gathered, I guess, footage from that time. But this is the first time we've ever had like modern cameras and something like this, or like everybody has a camera on their phone, or like, you know. So when you see like the LA riots and stuff like that, it's the same images over and over, which those are like incredible images that we have. But this, like, I remember those events, and I remember I've seen other like things on it, but I still haven't seen this footage because there's just so much to pull.
More.
It's cool to see like that, and then also this film does a really good job, this documentary, of following key people in St. Louis's like community. So we get to really like walk with them along this journey from when it happened, like when the death happened, to when like the verdict came out over the police officer.
I think it also does a really good job of like shining light on even some of the activists that we didn't even really know about. So you got people who were young, mad young,
wrote on some of their names
who were involved in the protest, and because of the actions that they had done during the protests, ultimately had left them being imprisoned. That was very interesting. I think it also was like a great way of personally following those activists outside of their activism. So like, what plagues them? You know, them, the whole idea of being able to separate your work from home, that was non-existent for many of these activists, because at the end of the day, many of these activists were Black or they're people of color. So they were experiencing these bias and microaggressions and brutality almost every day of their lives. So it's kind of like there's no level of separation. And then the family life that they had attached to them, like them having this overwhelming desire to wanting to do something because it was for the betterment of the people, you know, they love, you know, whether that's their partners or their kids.
All of them had kids except for one. I forget his name, but he's the one that was mainly like speaking like on TV or like to other political leaders. I don't know if you remember his name. You know what I'm talking about?
Darren Seals?
I don't know.
Did he have locks?
Nah, he had a kid. It was like the one, he had like a regular cut, and he was saying like, "I bet they're building cases on us right now." He was like laying on his couch, like he was stressed, bro.
Oh yeah.
To see.
I don't remember his name, but yes, I remember.
Man. Yo, I was gonna say about like what you just said about like seeing them like at home and still like having to deal with it, like there's no rest. There's a dope James Baldwin quote when we get into our last film, just about how like you're only free when you're fighting. But there is no time for rest, and how if that's the case, like there's a shelf life on that. Like eventually, it's going to get to you, and like we saw that happen with the one lady who had the daughter. You know what I'm talking about? Like towards the end, you can see the progression in her, like how she was feeling. Like by the end, she was like saying, like I'm seriously on medication now. Like I'm paranoid. Like I'm freaked out. They're trying to build a federal case against me. Like so it's really interesting to see like that up close and personal.
Yeah. I think that's what makes me really enjoy it some more, because it was like, it was as stripped down as you can be with following people who are involved in a movement, you know? What kind of separates this between past documentaries, because our past leaders and activists, they're no longer with us. You know, we got like the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, the Medgar Evers, they're you know, they're not with us anymore. The Stokeleys, they're not with us. So they're only as stripped down and as personal as they can be. And so here's a documentary that's actually like in real time following these activists, in real time following their personal lives, in real time, you know, analyzing the mental toll it, you know, being an activist, specifically an activist in Ferguson during the foundations of the Black Lives Matter movement, and etc.
Can I go like, I know we're probably about to run out of time on this one, but I do have one critique on this film. Because I think it's like a dope documentary, but I think it kind of stays at the level of like just experience. I don't think it ever takes that step forward into like understanding. You know what I mean? You just really get like first count. We get like witness kind of things, but we're subjected to like their viewpoint, right? So we never step outside of that. And then also from a filmmaking perspective, I saw that they had like quotes, and it was like section to 6 sections, right? And there was like some crazy, like great quotes. Like I'm talking about the best quotes you can find, like some heat. But I would have liked for them, because then with the quotes, it also had like a title. Like one was about the new generation and all this other stuff. But if you really watched it, bro, it was in chronological order. I feel like it would have been so much more powerful if they would have taken the quote and the title for each section and then made that part of the documentary focus on that aspect of the whole thing. Because when it went chronological, the quote really didn't mean anything to go with the story. It was just like a random quote they threw out there. You know what I mean? So it was really like there wasn't a lot of power in that. I just would like to see that maybe pushed further. But that's all.
So if you have not seen the movie, I highly recommend you watch the movie because we'll be going a little more in depth in our next episode of the Real Film Pod about the documentary and our other two documentaries that we'll be discussing today. So definitely take a look into that. If you are one of those people who is it's unbeknownst to you about the struggles that Black and brown people face in America, or the personal fight that these activists have for equality for all of us, for police reform or the defunding of police, definitely need to check out these documentaries, specifically Who Streets. And I also had the opportunity at my university to screen Who Streets, so that's probably another reason why I'm a fan of it. But I had the opportunity to screen Who Streets documentary and then have a Q&A amongst students and faculty about the documentary. So it definitely allows the opportunity to have an open discussion and insight, and maybe give a diversity and opinion on people's personal accounts and takes on the documentary itself. So definitely check that out so you can be with us as we go a little bit further in the next episode. But moving along, we're going to be discussing the next documentary. This one was cold, bro. This was a great documentary. Great. Vulture, shout out to y'all for compiling a list and having this on there, because this one sits at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. 100%. But this one is called Let It Fall, Los Angeles, 1982 to 1992. And so this documentary was initially released April 21st, 2017. It is by filmmaker John Wiley as he examines the decade tensions of civil unrest and the events in Los Angeles that culminated to the citywide violence following the Rodney King verdict on April 29th, 1992. So this is directed and screenplayed by John Ridley. Features a number of activists during the time, a number of witnesses during that time, a number of political people who were kind of put in positions during those times. You got police chiefs, you have police commissioners, all of that involved in this documentary, giving personal accounts. This is also produced by Jean Marie Condon and Malia Patria and John Riley. So definitely check that out if you have not seen it. It sits at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 7.7 out of 10 on IMDb. Google users not rated at 92%. It's definitely worth the watch. It's a little long, which is okay because every minute of it seems worth it because you're learning something new about the LA riots that you probably didn't know. Because here am I, somebody who was definitely born well after 1992, but I'm learning more stuff about the LA riots, or what led up to the LA riots, and how some of the stuff that happened in the 80s and in the early 90s that even apply to today.
Yeah, so I think that's the big thing with this film is that it covers a 10-year gap. And so the Rodney King beating, which is that's the climax. That's what kind of why we're here in a sense. Happened in what was it, 92, right? So that's the last year that the documentary really covers, right? So those 9 years before, I'm talking about, we start off with what the community was like at first, when there was middle class Black families there. People, was kind of good, you know what I mean? And then how drugs came through, and then how the police started going crazy, using that as an excuse to go crazy. It showed where the chokehold came from. It showed when the chokehold was banned and they brought in batons for the first time. These are all things dang, I never thought about where the metal baton came from. All this, or even we know with the LA riots, a lot of that had to do with the Rodney King thing, but it also had to do with
Latasha Harlan.
So it really breaks down not just what happened with that situation, but how did we get there? Where did Asian and Black tensions start? Was it always that way, or
so specifically the Korean and Black community?
Exactly. And so that's just crazy. And all of it has, every section has witnesses. It has people that are being interviewed who are really there. And the last thing I'm gonna say,
really there or have a direct connect to victims during these troubling times. So you got the mother whose son was shot and killed. Okay, so for example, we start as early with James Mincy Jr. So he was one of the main prominent victims, the first I think major victim to where LAPD was we have to ban chokeholds, because he was somebody who had died because of a chokehold. Then we start progressing to Latasha Harlins. And so if anybody is a Tupac fan, you've heard that name before by Tupac in some of his verses, or you've heard him talk about Latasha Harlins and Miss Wu or whatever her name is, or Do, and the killing of her, Soon Ja Do, and the killing of the 15-year-old African American girl at a convenience store, pretty much. And so that's what I really like, was that being able to expose me to cases that ultimately led up to that 3-day uprising in LA.
And like, here's the thing. Oh my bad. You
I was just saying, I didn't know about Mincy Jr. I knew a little bit about Latasha. I knew a little bit about Latasha, but the actual details that were provided by actual witnesses in that moment, I have never heard before. So it was very interesting to be able to receive that.
I think also too, it's the way they did it. Cause look, all right, like whereas the first one, also I want to point this out because I think the reason I point out the criticism in the first one, I felt the need to, is because I think the first one's a very good example, Blue Streets, of like today. Like, this is like a first-hand account of today. So it's really important you watch those things because you really get to like a full understanding outside of your own knowledge of an event. But I think it's paired well with this because you see the historical context for this. And because that one happened so far in the past, they were able to collect 10 years of data. Whereas Who Streets will be better in 10 years when they can collect the 10 years of data. But with that being said,
it was also objective.
Yeah,
it was objective.
Yeah.
So you had people of both, like in different parts of during the uprising. You have police officers' first accounts. You have a commissioner during like their accounts. You have witnesses during those accounts. You have people who were actually convicting for like the attacks during those accounts.
Well, I got a point on that too.
You have a juror, somebody who was a juror during the Rodney King, giving an account. You have the prosecutor giving an account. So it's a lot of people that you're being able to get like information from. So where like ultimately it's kind of like you're the judge of like how the outcome should have been, because you're getting all types of accounts. It's not one-sided. It's like multiple different avenues,
like real life, bro. Like you don't really know what's going on. But that's the point. There's two things about that. A, it's so cinematic in the way that it foreshadows that. Because in the very beginning, we're getting like little bits of these people. We're like, I don't know who she is. And it all like ties together. And it's so dope how like it's shot and all that. So it's really like engaging. But along with what you're saying about getting both sides, it like, in a way, this is weird to say, but it like humanizes some of the police for some people, and then for like, let's say, white people, it shows like how easy it is to slip into racism. Because like I think when we think of like racist, we think of like, oh, he's a bigot, blah 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 blah. But when you hear people who like try to defend themselves, not
that's subtle racism, that microaggressions. People forget about those.
You get to see like the nuances. You know what I mean? Like even like, all right, just a real quick example: the one lieutenant that called his force off the day of like the riot.
Yeah.
In my heart of hearts, I don't believe he's like an evil dude. I think
you almost have a sense of appeal of why you understand why he did that. You understand why, in a sense. But
I totally understand why he did that. I understand why he was wrong. I mean, we see how he was wrong, but we also see how like he could have been right. It's just like it makes you sit in those moments and really think like, dang, this is like some complicated stuff. And then even the police that got charged with Rodney King thing, it talks about how like that's what they were trained to do. So while the onus is on them for beating him, the police chief is literally instructing them to do that. And then when it happens, he's like getting off. I say, oh, they're the bad individuals. But it really breaks down like how this is complex. Like this is a systematic issue. It's crazy, bro. Just watch it. Just watch it. It's 2 hours. It's really long, but
because we don't want to go too far in depth with it, because like I said, that's what we're going to be doing with our next episode, the part 2 of this episode. We'll be going a little bit more in depth with those cases and how we can even apply them today. Specifically, I definitely want to go a little bit more in depth with the whole banning of the chokehold. And first off, I didn't know there's 2 methods of chokeholds that were taught.
Bro, I seen somebody doing the bar one on Twitter like 2 days ago. I'm like, wasn't that banned in the 80s?
Yeah, like I didn't know there was 2 methods. That's an example right there. And then I feel like this is also a great, like documentaries like this present you with, okay, this is a tactic that they were taught, and this is why it wasn't successful. This is a tactic that is taught and wasn't successful. So this is also an opportunity for people to kind of like, right now, this is a little off, but right now I feel like a lot of us are a little, confused of how to move forward. And so one way to move forward is demands and actual like notations of what we want change. And that's a prime example of being able to look at something that realize it was a tactic, because chokeholds is not just a tactic in LAPD. We know chokeholds is a tactic almost every police department has, and ultimately has led to the demise of not just one but multiple people. Hence, example, Eric Garner. So I definitely think this is worth the watch, and I think it's going to be worth you guys joining us in our next episode as we analyze this a little bit more and being able to apply them to recent cases of the movement, of brutality, of race, all of that. So yeah, this was by far the best. Also, I only have one notation that might be a negation of this documentary was I wasn't too much of a fan of them like giving me so many accounts, because it was kind of hard to keep up with who was who and who was associated with who. And then they don't reveal until later on. If you notice in like the bios of the people, they just say, oh, LA resident. But then like progress a little bit forward, and then it's like, oh, Kiki is the actual person who is charged and for this.
I'm gonna counterpoint really quick.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why you were able to see like the complex issues within the community, because you have people that weren't necessarily like talking about this situation, but the editor snuck it in here, so it's like, dang, it's all relates. Even had like the Korean woman, she was talking about Black issues. Comes to find out, she's talking about because her son died. But the way they like structured it, you just get her viewpoint on Black issues, period. You know what I'm saying? So it's really like there's no real clear path.
And that was also another thing. It was just kind of like we were getting her viewship on like Black issues or what was happening with Black people during that time for somebody who was in a part of a different community and at one point in time was at odds with that community. She was part of the Korean community who was at odds with the Black community. But she was ultimately also she was that person whose son died, not by somebody Black, but died by one of the people, a part of that community, somebody who was Korean, who thought it was a smart idea to pick up arms and protect the neighborhood and ultimately end up killing somebody in their own community, you know? Just like the brother of one of the young woman who was killed in the middle of a gang war, who was shot in the head and ultimately became brain dead. I mean, he even said himself, it was just kind of like, it's messed up that, my sister died, but I can understand why people of South Central are kind of like, this is just one of many that happens in our town, our city all the time. Y'all only gave light to it because she's not Black. We have people dying all the time due to gang violence, but that seems like nothing y'all want to talk about until it happens to somebody else. And he was somebody right there was just kind of like, you appeal to him because his sister was somebody who passed away, but he also appealed to the fact of what he says is the fact that many people have had the same experiences, but we don't want to listen to them because they're Black, or because they're just the population of people who it happens to.
Yeah.
Definitely worth the watch. Like I said, Let It Fall. Let It Fall. Definitely worth the watch.
We about to dip into like actual analysis, bro.
I know. I had to stop myself. I had to stop myself, but it's worth it. It's almost. It's a little over 2 hours, so it's like 2 hours and 24 minutes. It's worth every minute of it, you guys. Like, I'm telling you, I was sitting down watching it in my living room, and my mother came down, and she just comes up to go. She don't like watching stuff like this because it's a lot. She does watch it already and takes it in, but it was one of those where she literally is sitting on the steps for like a consecutive 20 minutes just watching it, because it was so engaging, and she was learning things she had never learned before. And she was somebody who had grew up during that time of the Rodney King, that she was in her early 20s when that stuff kicked off. She was like probably like 19, 20, 21. So she's a young Black woman during the time of the Rodney King era. So she's getting that experience herself, but in a different, state. So if she was just engaged and I'm engaged, it's definitely going to make you more engaged. But we're going to move on to the next documentary. This was a relatively popular documentary if you have not seen it. A lot of people hyped it up. You got like actors like Yashidi hyped it up, Oprah hyped. Everybody and mama was hyping up this documentary when it first came out in 2016, and that is I Am Not Your Negro. So it is an hour and 35 minutes. It was initially released February 3rd, 2017. And the bio is, in 1979, James Baldwin wrote a letter to his literary agent describing his next project, Remember the House. The book was to be revolutionary, personal account of the lives and assassination of his three close friends, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. At the time of Baldwin's death in 1987, he had left behind only 30 completed pages in his manuscript. Filmmaker Raoul Peck envisions the book James Baldwin never finished. So this is directed by Raoul Peck, produced by a number of other people, but It's over James Baldwin's kind of like personal account of his relations and the activism of his friends and himself. It sits at a 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, 7.8 out of 10 on IMDb, and a 91% on for Google likes. Definitely check it out. It's worth it. Look into it a little bit more, be able to formulate your own opinion, because we will be going a little bit more in depth in the next episode.
This one's definitely different than the first two, by the way. It's like way more of like a study.
Objective and reflective. Yes. It is like an observation, like you said, account. Like it's exactly that. But that's James Baldwin. That's who he was. Like he even mentioned in talking about himself, like why he couldn't align with certain parties or movements or account or like organizations, because he had too many. His mind was constantly moving with questions in regards to each one of these organizations.
Like you said, Black Panthers, I didn't think all white people were devils. The ACP, I didn't believe in black elitism against other blacks. The Christian church, I felt like they were being hypocritical. The Muslims, same thing. Like he really had examples of like why he felt the need to be
just himself.
Yeah. So that's really dope.
And he's right, because a lot of them had that philosophy, that the elitism and colorism that came with NAACP at the time too.
Especially in Harlem. I think this is New York.
Yeah, people also tend to forget that NAACP wasn't founded by all black people. Like it wasn't. That just wasn't a thing. It was founded by like at least half of his members, or over half of his members, were founded by white people. So of course there was going to be some, to a degree, a level of colorism and elitism in the organization. But that's neither here or there. But I enjoyed this documentary. Ultimately, one of my favorite aspects of this documentary is the narration of Samuel L. Jackson. I really enjoyed it, because if you know anything about Samuel L. Jackson, you know he has a very like political past, an activism type past, you know, from being at Morehouse College and, you know, holding hostage boards of trustees that included Martin Luther King Sr., until demanding a reform and curriculum and some of the things that are taking place as an institution. They ultimately got what they wanted, but of course there are consequences with going to those extremities of activism. So, and then he was, I didn't know this, but he was an usher and attended the funeral of Martin Luther King Jr. I didn't know anything about that. And he gives his accounts on that in other articles like the Hollywood Reporter. Definitely check those out. But I liked the fact that you get Samuel Jackson to narrate it, because I feel like people love to just joke around about Samuel Jackson, you know, him being this no filter cussing type of black man.
Snakes?
Yeah, like when people think of Samuel Jackson, think about that. Not the fact that this is somebody who is 71 years old and have been exposed to all types of racism and bigotry movements, civil rights movements, human movements, all that. So he has a direct connection to some of these things. Like example, being the usher of Martin Luther King Jr. after his assassination. You know?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think how are we on time? How much time do you have? Like 2 minutes?
We got about like little five at most.
All right, bet. I think for me, this is my favorite one of the three, just because, like, from the actual craft of like filmmaking, I feel like this film was the least, was not as much of a slave to like being chronologically correct. Like, it still was. I mean, it still was in order a lot, like throughout his life, which a lot of documentaries are. But this one really focused on ideas. And granted, this is not about one event, so like, of course, it's gonna be like more like that. But I just really like the idea of like we're piecing through James Baldwin's head, and like it's giving you imagery to like accentuate that literally puts you in the moment. So like when it's talking about, like he talks a lot about like films and how like films impacted him and just the black community. It's showing you those films, and then it like goes and shows you like the actors, and then they'll like relate to like a film for today, and they'll like go back to another idea, and they'll like hop to Ferguson footage, you know, like it does a lot of like crafty filmmaking things to really like paint ideas.
I think it also does a really good of analyzing the people he would think was on the side of doing right for the people, and how they were at the end of the day still humans. They were still conflicted by not only well, not that, but not only they were conflicted by a moral obligation, but also by at the end of the day being considered a traitor to the United States and to their people. And that was Bobby Kennedy. Like everybody has in their minds that the Kennedys were like the most progressive, you know, kind of like establishment of like politicians that there ever was, and that's not true. They were still human beings. They still were politicians at the end of the day, and they still had to appease an overwhelming amount of older white men who had conservative views. And so an example was him giving an account of him wanting the escort of a young woman as she was integrating into a predominantly white high school, like her being the first integrated student. And so you have Lorraine Hansberry, which I love that he brought up Lorraine Hansberry,
We're really good
playwright
friends.
of Raising the Sun. And I believe she was also somebody who identified as queer. I could be wrong too. But yeah, them bringing up the fact that like they had a whole sit down with the Attorney General at the time, which is Robert F. Kennedy, and how they were pretty much trying to appeal to him why it would be so important and send a message of having, you know, the National Guards, you know, kind of be with her as she goes and integrates into school. And Bobby just didn't really necessarily understand that at all, unfortunately, because at the end of the day, he was looking at it from the lens of being an Attorney General of the United States and also being a white man. So there's only so much empathy, you know, so much empathy that he can impose on the situation. So
I got a lot more to say about that later, but I do want to talk about real quick, like the way like this film is watched. I think with the other ones too, it's way more of like a you sit and watch it and let it hit you experience.
Mm-hmm.
This is way more a thought exercise. So it's one of those films like if you're watching it with your brain turned off, you're gonna be lost. This is the way he talks. It's the times. He's really a real philosophical dude, bro. Like you know, like everything he talks about is really like heavy, kind of complex.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's one of those things where it benefits to watch it and be able to pause, look something up, then come back. And I think I did that the most when I started seeing like the people he was around. Like, which is funny because I remember he had one part he was around Marlon Brando, right? You know, I know Marlon Brando was like a great actor and everything, but like every time I see like an older white actor, I'm like, but were they racist? And so I had that moment like looking up him and really seeing like, oh, he was rocking with the Black Panther Party, all of this stuff. And so like stuff like that, or you see like Medgar Evers, right? I know he's like a big part of this thing, but I didn't really know too much about him. But it gives you enough to where you go look up more and you come back to the film and it's like, man, like you know what I mean?
Those connect. I don't want us to go too far in depth, but that concludes what we'll be talking about in regards to I Am Negro and Who Streets and Let It Fall for this episode. Please, please, please join us for part 2 of this episode as we go a little bit further into analyzing these documentaries because they are timely. If you're not aware of what's going on right now, you need to get aware because it's affecting us as the Black people and our other brown brothers and sisters. So it's definitely timely. It's worth watching, and it's a great resource in regards to knowing about the struggles that Black and brown people face in America without exhausting your Black friends, your Black faculty members, your Black staff. These are great resources. If you're not the one that sits down and going to read maybe a 200-page book, getting in touch with these documentaries and blocking out an hour, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of your time just to watch something is worth
also,
it.
bro, also, we gotta like start treating like I know Black people, we have Black history and everything, but I think just in terms of like other races and stuff and everybody, like this is all American history. As soon as everybody acknowledges that and accepts that, like and treats it as like this is the history of our country, it's important for everybody to know this stuff, bro. Because that's the only way people are gonna be able to move forward in a way of understanding. And just like the ignorance is the problem, bro. Like everybody needs to like really hone in right now. Have everybody's attention. Like really learn.
I agree. But we thank you all for joining us on this episode of The Real, a Moving Picture podcast. Join us in our next episode as we go a little bit in depth about each one of these documentaries. And beyond this episode, we'll be going a little bit more in depth with some narratives, and stay tuned for that. So make sure you plug into the next episode because we're going to give you an in the queue and we're going to recommend some movies recommend some narratives about the systemic and systematic struggles that Black people experience in America. That way you can be caught up on the conversation. We thank you. If you have not done it already, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Real Film Pod. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or even suggestions, definitely shoot us something in the comment sections, DM us, shoot us an email because that's in the bio as well. But we appreciate I said the bio as well. But we appreciate it. We thank you for joining us, and we thank you for being a part of the conversation. My name is Honesty Tajay.
It's your boy Shaka, Shot B94, Bucks and 6. Giannis, we back in this thing. What's good? All right.
All righty. And that concludes the episode. Bye.
Deuces.